about Oklahoma State a little bit on this program a couple months ago. And, I think a lot of people are going to be covering this game for the very obvious. Oklahoma State was a 20 and a half point underdog to Oregon. And I got to tell you, that was definitely one of the hardest games that I've watched in a really, really long time. Final score was 69-3. Oklahoma State's first game of the season was versus Tennessee Martin, and for the most part, that went pretty smooth. Aside from their starting quarterback, I think he broke his ankle or something. He ended up having to get surgery, so they had to go to Zane Flores, who just completely became unglued in that game, throwing two straight pick sixes. I think he went for 7 for 19 for 60 yards or something like that. But it's also not all on him as well. I mean, the Oklahoma State gave up 631 yards of total offense to Oregon. They had 5 rushing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns. And, considering that Oklahoma, they were ranked 128th in rushing yards per game last season. I mean, it's just the same inconsistencies that we're seeing over and over again. And when they brought in coordinators, Doug Meacham, who came over from TCU, who was coaching Josh Hoover last season, I think a lot of people were expecting at least to be a little bit better. Obviously, both those dudes are, pretty young. So obviously there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, but you definitely have to be a little bit scared after seeing the offensive productivity, since for the most part, it was a lot of 3 and outs, only 200 yards of total offense. And you didn't even score a touchdown on top of that too. So that's obviously frustrating as well, because you're sitting there and saying, obviously they never really got into a rhythm to begin with. He got sacked multiple times. I talked about the 2 pick sixes, and also the offensive line really didn't help much at all either. So I don't want to put this all on Zane Flores or all on one particular person. But I think the most obvious thing that we can really talk about here is defensively. Now, you guys know, anyone who's watched this show knows that Florida's primarily been my team, and I've been pretty critical of Todd Grantham on the show. And there's a reason why I'm critical of him on the show. And it's just the defensive collapses are just continuing to just pile up. And it really just seems like this is one of those situations where, instead of Oklahoma State kind of saying to themselves, I do give them credit for completely overhauling the coaching staff, by the way. Let's not undermine that. This just, to me, this feels like almost similar to Mac Brown last season, in the sense that the athletic director and the chancellor and the school gave him a ton of shit for what he was doing. And he's like, all right, I'll appease you guys by hiring some of my coordinator friends. And what happens is Mac Brown decides to hire Jeff Collins as his defensive coordinator. And anyone who has seen Jeff Collins as a defensive coordinator after him being at Georgia Tech, I mean, that story kind of writes itself, and it really hasn't changed much. I mean, because when you look at that defense yesterday, I mean, was anyone expecting it to be super competitive? No. I mean, I think we were expecting maybe Oregon to win by maybe 4 touchdowns, maybe. But for, just some of the things that happened here is just absolutely inexcusable. Like, for example, when at the very beginning of the game, Oregon's Noah Whittington ran for a 60-yard touchdown, untouched on pretty much the second play of the game. So it wasn't just passing the ball. It was also, running the ball too. And when you have those struggles that you've had last year, now granted, it is a pretty transfer heavy roster. We do know that, hey, they're not going to have as many resources as some of the higher Big 12 programs, but at the same time, it's inexcusable for you to be a Power 4 program and letting Oregon walk in and just essentially just running any sort of play that they want on you. Over 70% completion percentage, 600 yards in total. It's just inexcusable, and just a lot of these issues that were pretty evident going into the season are just so paramount right now, which I think leads to the question of, how does Oklahoma State solve this, and most importantly, can they figure this out? Because as much as I love Mike Gundy, I think he deserves a ton of credit for what he's done for Stillwater, Oklahoma. I mean, he's an alumni there. A lot of people don't know that he's an alumni. He was an assistant coach for a number of seasons before he ever got the opportunity to coach there. He's been there going on his 21st year now. But it just seems like he just shoots himself in the foot all the time, whether it's his rants that he goes on his Oklahoma State radio show, or him taking a dig at Dan Lanning for the amount of NIL money that Oregon to spend. And granted, we all knew we know that Oregon, without Phil Knight's money into the program, that we all kind of know that. So like it's kind of just an obvious sort of thing that doesn't really have to keep being brought up, because I mean, anybody who's watched Oregon football pre 2005, 2006, I mean, they were a pretty just mediocre program. So it's, yes, there is some truth to that, but it's the bigger issue is that you're just making excuses at this point, as opposed to trying to turn it around. Because granted, too, 2 games before that to finish the 2024 season, you got shut out by Colorado 52-0. So to go from 52-0 in 2024 to having a nice little tune-up game versus Tennessee Martin, and then to have your worst record, or coming off your worst season ever, and then having the biggest blowout in school history right afterwards, it's just a serious dud, and it definitely kind of makes you nervous to kind of see what's about to happen here. But I think if you're Oklahoma State, I mean, here's essentially what you pretty much have to do. I'd say first and foremost, I mean, Doug Meacham and Todd Grantham really kind of have to figure this out, because it is important to know that neither of them have really called plays since 2021. So maybe there is some growing pains there, because obviously Grantham was defensive coordinator under Dan Mullen, and then Doug Meacham, the last time he was TCU's coordinator, he was under Gary Patterson when he was in his final year, right after Sonny Dykes took over. So I mean, there's definitely going to be some growing pains when you have a freshman, you have a bunch of younger assistants, but it just seems like that you're at the point where instead of hiring guys that you think could clearly, figure this out, they're kind of just going with the guys that they think were kind of the win now hires too, because they also completely had to renegotiate with the school, because Oklahoma State was almost sitting there saying, hey, we might we're thinking about firing you this season. And then Mike Gundy pretty much had to say, okay, well, my contract runs into 2028. So you know what I'll do for the dud of the 3-9 season I had last year, instead of my buyout being $21 or $22 million, I'll give you guys a hometown discount and make it $15 million. So it's just one of those things where if I'm an Oklahoma State fan, I'm pretty petrified with what I'm seeing. A lot of the issues that I think they're having were kind of foreshadowed if you really kind of look at their roster and you look at the history of Doug Meacham and Todd Grantham. Now, granted, they're well-experienced guys. They bring a ton of experience for a team that desperately needs it, but it just seems like it's just a situation where there's just going to be a serious learning curve. And until Mike Gundy decides to stop being stubborn and they take it one game at a time, this just seems like a train wreck that's just bound to happen.